Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair and to the second week of Classic Novel Month 3. This week we're looking at a book that I haven't read since I was in middle school, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And if you haven't read his books but you recognize the name, it's probably because of that Rachel Bloom song. Ray Bradbury is one of the most famous American sci-fi authors of all time, and his books are always really good. And I remember this one being really good too, but does it hold up? Let's find out. The cover on this edition is neat, but I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about the one from the edition that I first read. This one. It's a guy covered in pages from what I presume to be books who is on fire and holding his hand in front of his face. I think that's symbolic to the book, but it has been a while since I've read it, so let's get to it. The book centers around Guy Montag, who is a fireman living in the unspecified future. A fireman is, as you all know, someone who goes around burning books. He returns home from work one night and meets Clarice.
Clarice.
Not that one! Huh. I haven't used that joke in a while. Feels good to use it again. Anyway, Montag meets Clarice McClellan, a free-thinking girl who causes Montag to question the life he is living and the world that he lives in that he never bothered to think about prior to that. Montag returns home to find his wife Mildred has overdosed on sleeping pills. He immediately calls for medical attention and her stomach is summarily pumped. She survives, but doesn't remember overdosing and won't even toy with the notion that she did it accidentally or on purpose. Clarice meets Montag on his way home for the next few days, planting seeds of doubt into his head, like asking him if it was true that long ago firemen put out fires instead of starting them, which he rebukes by saying that houses have always been fireproof. And Clarice says that she has heard that houses used to accidentally catch fire and the firemen had to put out the fires. Then, when he begins to expect her, she vanishes. I know what happened to her. She's going to be trapped in ice for 100 years and thawed out by two Eskimos. Then, while on a job ransacking a house for books, Montag steals a book right before the woman whose house they were ransacking sets herself on fire instead of leaving her house and her books. That, coupled with Montag's doubt, shakes him greatly. He returns home and asks his wife if she has seen Clarice. She, in fact, did know something about her whereabouts. Apparently, Clarice had died after being struck by a car and her family moved away. Montag tries to fall asleep to no avail as he is still shaken up and worried about the Hound. Not that one! Okay, new rule, that joke can only be used once a review. The Hound is a mechanical robot dog that aids the firemen, like a Dalmatian, except it's a robot. And it kills people. The next day, Montag awakes and feels ill, planning to call in sick to work. He relates the story of the woman burning herself alive to his wife and muses about possibly quitting his job, but she is less than sympathetic, and states that the woman was to blame because she had books. Captain Beatty, Montag's fire chief, shows up at the door to check up on Montag and says that every fireman has moments of sudden illness, and then recounts the story of how the unspecified future became how it was. You see, after the advent of television and movies, people's attention spans started to dwindle. Books were degraded and abridged to make them more accessible, and their value became lower. Then people started protesting against certain books that offended them for actual or trivial reasons. Eventually, the government banned books for the sake of public happiness, and the firemen began to be called upon to burn books. When Beatty told the story, Montag's wife tries to fluff his pillow, where he was hiding that book that he stole. He protests until she leaves the room, and Beatty ends his story by saying that every fireman eventually steals a book out of curiosity at some point, and as long as he burns it within 24 hours, there's no penalty to him or his family. Beatty leaves, and Montag reveals a dark secret to his wife. He has an honest-to-God stash of books that he's stolen over the past year and hid it in an air conditioner duct in their house. His wife wants to immediately destroy the books, but Montag stops her, saying that they should at least read them, and if they truly have no value, then they'll be destroyed. And so they begin reading them. Montag discusses his wife's suicide attempt and a war that's coming, and he mentions that they've started and won 2 atomic wars since 2022, which places this book in an undisclosed future after the year 2022. Their reading is interrupted by a phone call from Mildred's friends arranging a date to watch the parlor walls. In the future, the televisions are mounted in the walls, like the whole wall is a television. Kind of foreshadowing wall-mounted flat-screen televisions now that I think about it. Montag realizes that they'll need help understanding the books and calls Faber, a man who was an English professor before the government banned books. Montag asks about books, and Faber hangs up on him, causing Montag to go to his house and confront him, where they cook up a scheme to use a little earpiece for Faber to give Montag guidance on the books. When Montag gets home, Mildred and her friends are watching the walls, and Montag turns the TV off so that they can have meaningful conversation, something that they're not interested in aside from talking about the coming war pretty nonchalantly. Montag gets a poetry book from his stash, and that of course makes the woman confused, because books are supposedly bad. Faber warns Montag that it's a bad idea to read the book to them, but he does it anyway, and then burns it when Faber tells him to. And Mildred's friends leave in disgust, leaving Mildred to lock herself in the bathroom to probably take more sleeping pills. Montag goes to work and brings the Bible with him, since he had to give the chief something to deter suspicion. They get a call to go out and burn a house, and when they arrive at their target, something is very wrong. They're at Montag's house. It turns out that his wife and her friends reported him, and Mildred gets into a taxi and leaves. Beatty tells Montag to burn down his own house, but not with kerosene and a match, which is how they normally do it. He wants Montag to use a flamethrower and have to destroy his own home, piece by piece. Montag destroys his house, and Beatty discovers the earpiece and takes it, planning to trace the signal back to Faber to capture him as well. Montag threatens Beatty with the flamethrower, and Beatty just taunts him, causing Montag to burn him alive. He knocks the other fireman unconscious and runs off, getting bit by the hound, which injects a tranquilizer into his leg. Montag destroys the hound and continues his escape. Montag tries to get to Faber's house, stopping only to plant books in the house of another fireman and call in an alarm. He gets to Faber's house, and Faber's planning to leave town and tells Montag that there are colonies of exiled book lovers living down by the river. But unfortunately, they do not have a van down by the river. Montag escapes the manhunt that was out for him and finds the exiles, led by a man named Granger. Granger explains that they have all memorized books for when society wants to use them again. They watch a tiny television and sees the manhunt's end with an innocent man getting killed by another hound for Montag's crime, since the public's attention span isn't long enough for them to find the real Montag. But it's not all bad, since they watch in horror as bombers fly over the city and destroy it with nuclear weapons. Montag comforted that Clarice was already dead and Faber had left, but distraught that Mildred had perished along with everyone else in the city. So fake Montag would have died anyway, kinda making that whole innocent man dies for his crimes thing have less meaning. The next day, Granger tells Montag of the Phoenix, who was reborn from its own ashes, and equates it to mankind, who always rise from their ashes to be born once again, but unlike the Phoenix, have the advantage to remember how they were destroyed and the ability to learn from their mistakes. The novel ends with the group going toward the city to help rebuild society. And that was Fahrenheit 451. Was it good? Yeah. I admit, when reading it, I realized that I didn't remember as much as I thought I did about the book. I remembered the burning and the hound and some of the stuff about Beatty, but reading it again was like reading it for the first time. I honestly didn't know what to expect. It's interesting to note that I did see some parallels between our current society and the novel. That's not to say that we live in a totalitarian state that bans the reading of books, because obviously we don't. If we did, I'd be out of a job. But the talk about books being abridged and degraded to accommodate a short attention span is similar to how many people have foregone newspapers for shorter blog posts. And the people protesting the content of older books reminded me of how people will ban books from schools because they disagree with the content. It's like how people got Looking for Alaska banned for inappropriate content, or how The Diary of Anne Frank was banned for sexual content. It's a very slippery slope, and this book takes advantage of that. And it's kind of ironic that this book itself was banned in 1999 in Mississippi for vulgarity, considering that kind of thinking was a big theme in the book. For its time, the book was very progressive, and Bradbury drew inspiration from the Nazi book burnings during World War II, grounding the whole idea of this possible future in reality. I highly recommend this book to anyone who's interested in reading it. It's a great book, and it's one of those books that make you think, and to me, those are the best type of books. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit the subscribe button down there. And if you like, you can also leave a comment in the box below. And if you like this video, show it to your friends and share it around. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time.